It does not get better than a chat with Pat.
Today, we are excited to have with us Chase Crouse. Chase wrote the book, The God of Endurance. We just talked about endurance, a practical guide for incorporating exercise and nutrition into your spiritual journey. Welcome, Chase. How you doing today?
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, no problem. I was thinking in my head, here we are at the end of January, and most people make these, and I am always one of them, make these wonderful kind of New Year's resolutions. I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to exercise. I'm going to eat right. And then we get to the end of January and we go, yeah, I messed this up so bad. Let's just forget it. So your book certainly calls us to think about that. But what I love is how you integrate faith into all this. So can you share with our audience how does one integrate faith with this idea of physical health?
Yeah, one of the things I really like to tell people is we want to be authentically Catholic, but technically excellent, right? So it's not that we want to arbitrarily create, a quote unquote Catholic workout, right? But early on in my career, I would think about this question of, I look at the Catholic doctors and lawyers and business people in my life, and they didn't try to Catholicize like surgery, for example, right? Like they weren't throwing rosary beads up when they were, stitching somebody up. But rather because they were Catholic, and because they were authentic disciples of Jesus, that called them to be the absolute best in their field, right? To try and give their absolute best out of service of others. So when it comes to integrating faith into fitness, one of the key principles in our foundations we talk about in the book comes from JP2's theology of the body, namely in his call of self-mastery for self-gift, which he gets from God He Meant Best, right? Man finds himself through a sincere gift of self. But what JP2 adds in Audience 15 is that while that's true, you can't give what you don't have, right? So we want to position exercise, nutritional discipline, healthy habits in a place to where it's at the service, and the reason we do it is so that way we can conquer ourselves in order to better and more fully give of ourselves.
So, Chase, when it comes to health, especially physical fitness, diet, sometimes I kind of feel overwhelmed, kind of too much information, right? Try this, try that, the Mediterranean, the carnivore, the la 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 la. Can you help us out here? What's the best way to approach this whole concept of understanding how important our body is in this integrated faith that we talk about?
Yeah, and call me crazy, but I like what the Catholic Church teaches about virtue, namely that virtue is in the mean of two extremes, right? So when it comes to health, fitness, nutrition, the mean is the mean, the virtue is in the middle typically. So instead of trying to find the most extreme thing you can do, but rather I'm a fan of this idea of minimal effective dosing. So what's like the least amount of work I can do to get the most results possible, right? Because typically that's going to be the thing that's going to be sustainable. So if your income or your livelihood is contingent on the way your body looks or perform, if you're a professional athlete, a model, an actor, somebody like that, then yeah, you got to be kind of crazy, right? But for the other 99% of us who aren't that, we don't need to be a 10 out of 10. We need if you're a 0 out of 10 right now with all this, like your goal is just to be a 1. And then once we become a 1, become a 2, and then 2, and then a 3. And then, living in the 3 to 6 range, and the scale of 1 to 10, 10 being extreme, is the thing that for most people is sustainable. So finding something that's going to be sustainable, that's going to help you, and that's something you can maintain long term is really the most important thing.
So you talk a lot about just when you said start simply, and that's kind of the first rule you put out there, right? Just move more. So why is that so important? Why is it so important that we move more? Because a lot of us have sit at desks all day long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I get this idea from this woman named Dr. Gabrielle Lyons, and she's a big advocate on muscle-centric medicine, and she advocates, and I believe her too, that most people's problem isn't that they have too much body fat. Most people's problem is that they're too under-muscled, right? Muscle is the body's powerhouse. Muscle is where we increase our metabolic rate, where we store carbs and proteins, and it's one of those things where the more muscle you have, the better your bone density, especially as you age, so you protect your bones, your mitochondria functions more efficiently, and you have the energy to perform and to serve. And then as a fruit and as a result of having more muscle, it's actually easier to not only lose body fat, but to keep it off, right? And
Right.
so by focusing also on the movement piece, it's also the most like tangible, tactile thing.
Okay.
Like it's very easy to ask yourself, did I intentionally exercise twice this week or 3 times this week, instead of this kind of more vague, ethereal notion of like, did I quote unquote eat better this week, right? And there's some objective things you can track with that, obviously, but
Sure.
I like starting with the things that are most obvious and the most easiest to track, because you get those small wins, really quick out the gate, and it's going to set you up for success once you get to build muscle and to have muscle, which is so important as we age.
So, Chase, do you find, you talk about this resistance training that certainly helps build muscle, and cardio is important too, and that we need both. But what do you do for people as they age and they have limitations like bad knees, bad hips? How do they do cardio? How do they balance all that if they've got these limitations?
Yeah, so the great thing when it comes to exercise is that there is nowhere, anywhere in any kind of life rulebook saying that a squat has to look a certain way, unless you are a power lifter or a CrossFit athlete, or if you're competing in an event. Then yeah, there's rules. But for the rest of us that don't compete in CrossFit or powerlifting, then someone's squat might look a little different than others, but it's still a squat, right?
Okay.
So typically when I have clients that are maybe older or have limitations, I love getting them into a gym with actual machines, and maybe they can only do what appears to be a half of a rep, right? Or a half of a squat or whatever, but they can do that through some load. You can actually still build muscle, right, with that. Is it quote unquote perfect? Is it quote unquote optimal? Well, maybe not. But we know you can still build muscle from that, so once again, something's always better than nothing. And when it comes to cardio, yeah, you don't have to run. You can swim, you can walk, you can hike, you can ruck, you can get on the elliptical, you can get on a Stairmaster. I mean, there's so many things you can do for cardio. You can play pickleball, you can play tennis, right? Really, your heart doesn't know the difference between running and walking aggressively or hiking. It just responds to the fact that your muscles need more oxygen. So the best kind of cardio is the one that you enjoy doing, right? Because that's the one you're probably going to do long term. Once again, going back to this idea of whatever you can do consistently is really the most important.
So what about sleep? You say that's really important. Why is it so important?
Yeah, sleep is the primary place your body not only burns fat but builds muscle. So your body doesn't build muscle in the gym. All the gym does is signal the need for more muscle. And then when we sleep, that's the primary place our body recovers and builds muscle, but also loses fat at the same time. So people with sleep apnea know this anecdotally, at least, that when you're not sleeping well, you can actually gain weight really easily because you're not sleeping well. Your body recognizes it needs more energy, and therefore you're going to get more cravings for food, right? And coffee and sugary things that provide energy. But also when we sleep, you literally breathe out body fat. So you oxidize body fat, and part of the byproducts of that is water, which you go to the bathroom in the morning, but then also carbon dioxide, which you literally breathe out while you sleep. So if you want to lose fat and build muscle, and if your sleep's not where it needs to be, you're kind of just shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah. Well, Chase, thank you so much for being with us. And I want everybody to know, I did a full hour with Chase on this book. You could go back to The Virtuous Life online on demand. It was January 12th that we spent an hour. So thanks again, Chase. This is great stuff. I appreciate it.